The throne room of the empire stretched for nearly a mile in every direction. Pillars of white stone rose toward a ceiling painted with the conquests of 10,000 years. Golden light poured through windows carved from single crystals, and the floor was polished so perfectly that it reflected everything like still water. This was the heart of the most powerful empire in the known galaxy, and Daniel Cooper felt very small standing in it. He was a diplomatic, 34 years old, with broad shoulders and calloused hands that told the story of a life spent working. He had been a wrestler in college, then served 5 years in the Merchant Marine before joining the diplomatic corps. None of that seemed to matter here. They towered over him by at least 3 feet, their silver skin catching the light, their forearms folded in poses of casual superiority. They looked at him the way a person might look at an insect that had wandered into their home. Ambassador stood beside him, her gray hair pulled back tight, her face showing the strain of 15 years spent building relationships with these proud aliens. She had worked so hard to bring humanity to this moment. The trade negotiations had been going well, or at least as well as could be expected when dealing with a species that considered humans barely worth noticing. Empress sat upon her throne at the far end of the room. She was ancient by any standard, over 200 years old, and she had ruled the empire for every one of those years. Her silver skin had darkened with age to something closer to steel, and her forearms rested on the arms of her throne with the casual grace of absolute power. She had never been defeated in anything. Not in war, not in politics, and certainly not in the ritual combat that her people valued above all else. The negotiations had reached their final day. Humanity wanted trade rights in space, access to the rich mining colonies that dotted their 12-star systems. They wanted very little from humanity in return because they believed humanity had very little to offer. They saw humans as short-lived creatures from a brutal world, clever perhaps, but ultimately insignificant. Lord was the one who ruined everything. He was a noble of high standing, with skin so pale it was almost white and eyes that burned with old hatred. He had opposed any treaty with humanity from the beginning, and now he saw his chance to end the negotiations forever. "These creatures speak of trade as if they were our equals," said, his voice carrying across the throne room. "They come from a world of poison air and crushing gravity, a death world that breeds vermin rather than warriors. They have no honor, no courage, and no right to stand in this sacred place." Ambassador kept her face neutral, but Daniel could see the tension in her shoulders. This was a deliberate insult, designed to provoke a response that would justify ending the negotiations. The smart thing to do was ignore it. The diplomatic thing to do was let it pass and continue working toward the treaty. Daniel understood all of this. He also understood something else. The respected only strength. If humanity accepted this insult without response, they would be marked as cowards forever. No treaty would ever be signed because they would never agree to deal with a species they considered beneath contempt. "By the ancient laws of your empire," Daniel said, his voice steady and clear, "such an insult to the honor of a people can only be answered through the right of." The throne room fell absolutely silent. Every turned to stare at the small human who had just spoken. Ambassador grabbed his arm, her fingers digging in hard enough to leave bruises. "Daniel, what are you doing?" she whispered. "What I have to do," he replied. Empress leaned forward on her throne, and for the first time she looked directly at Daniel with something like interest. "You know of the right." "I know that it is combat to submission or death," Daniel said. "I know that it is fought with body and mind alone, no weapons. And I know that by accepting the challenge, I defend the honor of my entire species." Lord laughed. It was not a kind sound. "This creature wishes to die. How amusing." "I formally invoke the right of," Daniel said. "I challenge Lord to answer for his insult." The Empress raised one of her 4 hands, and the laughter stopped immediately. "The right cannot be invoked against a noble by an outsider. However, the insult was made against your entire species. By the ancient laws, such a challenge can only be answered by the ruler of the insulted people or their chosen champion." "Humanity has no ruler here," Daniel said. "I offer myself as champion." "And who would accept this challenge on behalf of the Empire?" the Empress asked. Lord spoke carelessly, but he spoke as a representative of authority. The challenge must be met by one who holds such authority. She stood from her throne, and Daniel realized just how tall she truly was. She must have been nearly 8 feet, and even at her age, her body moved with the fluid grace of a born predator. "I will accept the challenge myself," the Empress said. It has been many years since I participated in the rite. This will be an amusing diversion." The throne room erupted in murmurs. Ambassador looked like she might faint. Lord smiled with cruel satisfaction. Daniel simply nodded. "I accept." The Empress laughed and the sound echoed off the crystal windows. It was not a cruel laugh but genuinely amused, as if a pet had done something unexpectedly clever. "You have courage, little human. Foolish courage, but courage nonetheless. The rite will take place in 3 days. Use that time to make peace with whatever gods your species worships." She turned to her advisors as Daniel was led away. "Prepare a message of condolence for the human government. I expect this will be over quickly, and I wish to maintain diplomatic courtesy. It would be rude to kill their champion without expressing some regret." Her advisors bowed and began making preparations. None of them doubted the outcome for even a moment. The human would die, and that would be the end of any pretense that humanity mattered in galactic affairs. Daniel walked back to the human compound with Ambassador shouting at him the entire way. He listened to her anger and her fear, and he understood both. But he also knew something that she did not. He had watched the move. He had studied their bodies, their joints, their balance, and he had noticed something that gave him hope. They had never faced an opponent from a world with gravity twice as heavy as their own. They had never fought someone who had spent his entire life carrying a weight they could not imagine. The Empress thought this was a joke. She was wrong. The human diplomatic compound was a small building compared to the towering structures of the capital. It had thick walls designed to hold in the heavier atmosphere that humans preferred and gravity generators that simulated the pull of Earth. When Daniel stepped inside, he felt the familiar weight settle onto his shoulders like an old friend. Ambassador followed him in, and the increased gravity made her stumble for just a moment before she adjusted. She had spent so many years on light gravity worlds that Earth normal felt crushing to her now. Daniel barely noticed it. He had maintained the compound's gravity at full Earth standard specifically because it kept him strong. "You have lost your mind," said. "The Empress has never been defeated in combat. Never. In 200 years she has killed every challenger who has faced her. You are going to die, and you are going to take humanity's reputation with you." "If I had not accepted the challenge, our reputation would already be dead," Daniel replied. He walked to the small kitchen area and began preparing a simple meal. He would need to eat well over the next 3 days. The respect only strength. Backing down from that insult would have marked us as cowards forever. "There has to be another way." "There is not." Daniel sat down and began to eat. "You have worked with these people for 15 years. You know I am right." Was silent for a long moment. Then she sat down across from him, and the anger in her face faded into something closer to grief. "I know. I just wish there had been another option." Dr. Park arrived an hour later. He was the compound's physician, a quiet man with steady hands and worried eyes. He had to certify that Daniel was physically fit to participate in the rite, and he took this duty seriously. "Your body is in excellent condition," Park said after completing his examination. "Heart rate, lung capacity, muscle density, all well above average for humans. Whatever you have been doing to stay in shape, it has worked." "I train every day in full Earth gravity," Daniel said. "I run, I lift, I practice the wrestling techniques I learned in college. I never stopped." "That explains a great deal." Park hesitated. "You understand that physical fitness will not be enough. The Empress is faster and stronger than any human could ever be. She has 4 arms and 200 years of combat experience." "I know. Then how do you expect to win?" Daniel smiled, but there was no humor in it. "I expect to endure." High Champion arrived the next morning. He was the Empress's personal combat instructor, a massive with scars covering 2 of his 4 arms. He had been sent to explain the rules of the rite to Daniel, a duty required by ancient law. The challenged party had to understand exactly what they faced. "The rite of his sacred combat," said. His voice was deep and carried the weight of absolute certainty. "It continues until one party submits or dies. No weapons are permitted. No outside interference is allowed. The combat takes place in the arena, under the eyes of all who wish to witness." "I understand," Daniel said. Studied him with something that might have been curiosity. "You are smaller than our children. You have only 2 arms. Your skin is soft, your bones are fragile, and yours is laughably brief. Why did you accept this challenge?" "Because someone had to." The High Champion made a sound that might have been respect or might have been pity. I am required to demonstrate our combat techniques so that you understand what you face. Watch carefully, human. What followed was 20 minutes of the most impressive physical display Daniel had ever witnessed. Moved like water and struck like thunder. His four arms worked in perfect coordination, blocking and attacking simultaneously. His speed was beyond anything human reflexes could match. But Daniel watched carefully. He watched how balanced his weight. He watched how the four arms created leverage but also created vulnerabilities. He watched how the body moved, and he filed every observation away for later. "You are studying me," said when he finished, "not despairing, studying." "Yes." "Interesting." The High Champion gathered his things to leave. "You will still die, human, but perhaps you will die with more dignity than I expected." That evening, Commander Grace came to see Daniel. She was the military assigned to the compound, a woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. She and Daniel had served together years ago, before either of them had joined the diplomatic corps. "I heard what you did," she said. "It was either the bravest or the thing I have ever seen." "Probably both." Sat down beside him. "I remember you from the service. You were undefeated in wrestling throughout college. You studied 3 different martial arts after that, and you never, ever gave up on anything." "That is the plan," Daniel said. "They are stronger and faster, but they have never fought someone from a high-gravity world. Their home world has gravity less than half of Earth's. They have never faced an opponent who can simply refuse to fall down." "You think you can outlast her?" "I think I have to try." Was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small stone. It was smooth and gray, worn by years of handling. "This is from Earth, from the beach where I grew up. I have carried it with me for 30 years. Take it with you into the arena. Remember where you come from." Daniel took the stone. It was heavier than it looked, or perhaps that was just his imagination. "Thank you." That night he could not sleep. He lay in his bed and listened to the sound of his own heartbeat, counting the hours until the challenge. He thought about recording a message for his family back on Earth, words they could hold onto if he did not survive. But in the end, he decided against it. He would deliver those words himself when this was over. Across the city, in her private chambers, Empress was also awake. She sat before a screen that showed recordings of human athletic competitions. She watched wrestlers grappling on mats, their bodies twisting and straining in techniques she had never seen. She watched marathon runners pushing through exhaustion that would have stopped any. She watched boxers taking blow after blow and refusing to fall. For the first time, she felt a small flicker of uncertainty. These humans were strange creatures. They lived on a world that should have killed them, breathed air that was almost poison, and carried the weight of crushing gravity with every step they took. They were not strong by standards. But they did not seem to know how to quit. The Empress turned off the screen and tried to sleep. Tomorrow, she would kill the human quickly and put these foolish doubts to rest. He was just one small creature from a small world. He could not possibly be a threat. The arena had stood for 10,000 years. It was carved from the living rock of a mountain and could hold over 100,000 spectators in its tiered seats. Today, every seat was filled. Had come from all 12 star systems of the Empire to witness what they believed would be a moment of supreme entertainment. A human had challenged their Empress to ritual combat. The very idea was so absurd that it had become the most anticipated event in a generation. But they were not the only ones watching. Representatives from dozens of alien species had traveled to witness the spectacle. They had sent observers, their insect-like bodies clicking with anticipation. They floated in their water tanks, their tentacles pressed against the glass. They sat in perfect stillness, their stone-like faces revealing nothing. All of them had come for the same reason. They wanted to see a human die for their amusement. Far away, aboard the observation ship Resolute, Admiral watched a live broadcast of the arena. Her crew stood behind her in silence. They had served with humans like Daniel Cooper. They knew the kind of man he was, and they knew that what he was about to attempt was impossible. Daniel entered the arena through a gate barely large enough to fit a child. The sunlight was blinding after the dim corridors, and for a moment he could see nothing but white light and the roar of the crowd. Then his eyes adjusted, and he saw the scale of what he faced. The arena floor was a perfect circle of sand, 300 feet across. The walls rose up around it like cliffs, and above them the seats stretched toward the sky in endless rows of silver-skinned spectators. The sound they made was not cheering. It was laughter. Narrator stood on a raised platform overlooking the arena. He was ancient even by standards, his skin so dark it was almost black, his voice amplified to reach every corner of the massive space. "Today we witness the rite of," he announced. "A challenge of honor, sacred to our people for 10,000 years. The challenger is Daniel Cooper, representing the species known as humanity. He faces our beloved Empress, defender of the Empire and champion of our people." Daniel walked to the center of the arena. He could feel the sand shifting under his feet, could feel the weight of 100,000 eyes upon him. Ambassador was somewhere in the crowd, watching with terror in her heart. Commander was there too, her hand probably clutching that beach stone she had given him. He removed his diplomatic robes and stood in simple training clothes. His body was not impressive by standards. He was short, compact, with muscles built for endurance rather than explosive power. But those muscles had been forged in Earth's gravity, tempered by a lifetime of training. And his skin showed scars from years of wrestling, years of fighting, years of refusing to give up. The laughter in the crowd faded slightly. Some of them had seen the recordings of human athletes. Some of them were beginning to wonder. The Empress entered from the opposite gate, and the arena exploded with genuine cheering. Moved like a predator, all grace and contained violence. Her 4 arms hung loose at her sides, ready to strike at any moment. Her steel-gray skin seemed to absorb the sunlight, and her eyes were fixed on Daniel with the casual interest of someone about to crush an insect. She crossed the arena in seconds and stood before him. Up close, she was even more terrifying. She towered over him by nearly 3 feet, and her body radiated the kind of power that came from 2 centuries of combat experience. "You may yield now," she said quietly, so only he could hear. "I will grant you a quick death. There is no shame in recognizing an impossible situation." "No thank you," Daniel replied. "I came here to fight." Something flickered in her eyes, surprise perhaps, or maybe the faintest hint of respect. Then it was gone, replaced by cold focus. Narrator raised his hand. "Let the rite begin." The Empress attacked. Daniel had known she would be fast, but the reality was beyond anything he had imagined. Her first blow came from her upper right arm, a strike that should have shattered his skull. But Daniel was already moving. He ducked under the attack, letting it pass over his head by inches. Her second and third arms followed immediately, a combination that would have torn an opponent apart. Daniel twisted, redirected, and let the strike slide past him without making solid contact. He was not trying to block. Blocking would break his bones. He was trying to survive. The first 10 minutes were a blur of motion and pain. The Empress landed dozens of blows, each one powerful enough to cripple a normal opponent. Daniel absorbed what he could not avoid, letting his body bend rather than break. His ribs screamed. His arms were covered in bruises. Blood ran from a cut above his eye. But he did not fall. The crowd's laughter had stopped completely now. They watched in confused silence as the small human continued to move, continued to dodge, continued to refuse defeat. This was not how the rite was supposed to go. Challengers were meant to fall in minutes, not stand there taking punishment and coming back for more. After 30 minutes, something changed. The Empress's attacks became slightly slower, her movements less fluid. She was still faster than Daniel, still stronger, but she was beginning to tire. Her home world had gravity less than half of Earth's. Her body was not built for prolonged exertion. Daniel's body was built for exactly that. He began to press forward, not attacking but advancing, making her work harder, forcing her to expend more energy. Every step he took was a statement. Every second he survived was a victory. Prince sat in the royal box, watching his mother fight with growing unease. He had seen her defeat countless challengers, but he had never seen anything like this. The human was not winning, not even close, but he was not losing either. He simply refused to go down. After 1 hour, Daniel scored his first successful technique. The Empress overextended on a strike, and he caught her arm, twisted his body, and used her momentum against her. For one brief moment, she was off balance. It was not much. She recovered instantly, but a murmur ran through the crowd like an earthquake. No one had touched the Empress in combat for over 50 years. After 2 hours, Daniel was barely standing. His body was a map of pain, every muscle screaming for rest. But the Empress was breathing hard now, her movements heavy and labored. She had never faced an opponent who simply would not stop. He caught her again, this time with a wrestling hold that locked two of her arms together. She broke free with raw strength, but the effort cost her. She was slowing down, and they both knew it. After 3 hours, something changed in her eyes. It was subtle, just a flicker, but Daniel recognized it immediately. For the first time in 200 years, Empress felt fear. The arena had fallen into a silence so complete that Daniel could hear his own heartbeat echoing off the ancient stone walls. 100,000 sat frozen in their seats, unable to process what they were witnessing. The alien observers had stopped their clicking and floating and shifted to absolute stillness. Even narrator had run out of words. The combat had entered its 4th hour, something that had never happened in the recorded history of the right. Daniel could barely see through the blood running into his eyes. His left arm hung loose at his side, possibly broken, definitely useless. 3 of his ribs were cracked, and every breath felt like swallowing fire. His legs shook with exhaustion, and his vision kept blurring at the edges. But he was still standing. The Empress was in worse shape than she wanted to admit. Her silver skin had darkened to an ugly gray, a sign of extreme fatigue in her species. Her 4 arms moved with none of their earlier grace, each strike taking visible effort. She was breathing in great heaving gasps, her body screaming for rest that she could not afford to take. She had never faced an opponent like this. In 200 years of combat, every challenger had fallen within minutes. Some had lasted longer, the strongest warriors of her empire putting up resistance for perhaps an hour before their bodies gave out. But this human, this small creature from a death world, simply would not stop. Daniel advanced again, and the Empress swung at him with her upper right arm. The blow was slow by her standards, almost casual by the standards of the fight's 1st hour. Daniel slipped under it and drove his shoulder into her midsection. It was like hitting a wall. Her body was still stronger than his, still more durable, but she staggered. For the first time in the fight, she was the one moving backward. Ambassador sat in the stands with her hands pressed against her mouth. She had stopped breathing at some point in the 3rd hour and had not started again. Tears ran down her face, but she did not know if they were from hope or terror. The man she had yelled at, the man she had called a fool, was doing the impossible. Commander sat beside her, one hand clutching the spot where she had given Daniel her lucky stone. She had served with soldiers her entire life. She had seen courage and sacrifice and determination beyond what most people could imagine, but she had never seen anything like this. Daniel pressed his advantage. He was too injured to strike effectively, too exhausted to generate real power, but he could move. He could position, and he could use the wrestling techniques that no had ever encountered. He shot in low, grabbing the Empress around her legs with his one working arm. She tried to sprawl to push him away, but her reactions were too slow. He drove with his legs, powered by muscles forged in Earth's crushing gravity, and she went down. The sound that came from the crowd was like nothing Daniel had ever heard. It was not a gasp or a scream, but something deeper, a sound of fundamental reality shifting beneath their feet. Their Empress, their undefeated champion, their living symbol of supremacy, was on the ground. She fought back with desperate fury, her 4 arms wrapped around Daniel, trying to crush him, trying to throw him off. But he had been wrestling since he was 6 years old. He had spent 30 years learning how to control a fight on the ground. Her extra arms were a disadvantage here, tangling with each other as she struggled. Daniel moved to mount position, sitting on her chest and pinning her shoulders with his knees. She bucked and twisted beneath him, and he nearly lost his grip twice. But he held on. He always held on. Prince rose to his feet in the royal box. His face showed something no one had ever seen there before. It was not anger or shame. It was awe. The Empress managed to throw Daniel off, and they both scrambled to their feet. She was gasping for air now, her movements jerky and uncontrolled. He was barely conscious, running on nothing but stubbornness and the memory of every person who had ever told him he could not do something. She attacked again, but there was no coordination left in her strikes. Daniel caught one of her arms in a hold he had learned from a Brazilian instructor years ago, a technique designed to hyperextend the elbow joint. He applied pressure, and she grunted in pain. "Yield," he said. His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Yield with honor. There is no shame in this. You have fought well." She twisted in his grip, and he felt her other arms reaching for him. He shifted his position, catching a second arm in the same hold. Now 2 of her 4 limbs were trapped, and she could not generate the leverage to escape. "You have proven your worth," Daniel continued. "Your people have seen your strength. End this now and we both walk away with respect." The Empress stopped struggling. For a long moment she simply lay there, breathing hard, staring up at the sky above the arena. Daniel could feel her pulse beneath his hands, racing with exhaustion and something else. Something he recognized from his own heart. It was the feeling of meeting someone worthy of respect. "In 200 years," she said slowly, "no one has ever spoken to me as an equal during combat. No one has ever offered me mercy from a position of strength. There is a first time for everything." She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, there was something new in their depths. It might have been pain, it might have been admiration, it was probably both. "I yield," Empress said. "The right is concluded, the human is victorious." The words echoed across the silent arena. For a moment, nothing happened. Then narrator rose to his feet and spoke the formal words of acknowledgement, and the reality of what had occurred finally sank in. Daniel released the Empress and helped her to her feet. She accepted his hand without hesitation, and they stood together in the center of the arena, covered in blood and sweat and sand. The crowd did not cheer, they were too stunned for that, but one by one they began to rise, not in celebration but in recognition, in respect. A human had done the impossible, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same. The Imperial Palace had stood for 8,000 years, and in all that time, it had never hosted a gathering quite like this one. The Great Hall was filled with representatives from every major power in the galaxy. They clicked nervously in their corner, their compound eyes fixed on the small human who had changed everything. They floated in their mobile water tanks, tentacles pressed against the glass in what might have been a gesture of respect. Even they, whose stone faces never showed emotion, seemed different somehow. Daniel stood before the High Council, his body wrapped in bandages and supported by a simple cane. Dr. Park had wanted him to remain in the medical bay for at least a week, but Daniel had refused. There was work to be done. The 12 members of the High Council sat in a semicircle, their silver faces showing a mixture of emotions that Daniel was only beginning to learn to read. Some showed resentment, some showed curiosity, and some, he thought, showed something that might become respect in time. Empress sat at the center of the council, her own injuries hidden beneath ceremonial robes. She had not spoken to Daniel since the arena, but she had ensured he received the finest medical care the Empire could provide. That gesture said more than words ever could. "By the ancient laws of the right," the Empress announced, her voice carrying across the Great Hall, "the victor may name their prize. Wealth, territory, titles, all are within your right to claim. Speak, Daniel Cooper of Earth, and tell us what humanity demands." The hall fell silent. Every eye was fixed on Daniel. In his pocket, he could feel the weight of Commander's beach stone, a small piece of earth that had traveled so far. "I claim nothing for myself," Daniel said. "I fought for humanity, and so my prize belongs to humanity." A murmur ran through the assembled aliens. This was not how victors typically behaved. "We came here seeking trade rights in space," Daniel continued. "Fair access to your markets and your resources. We also came seeking something more important than trade. We came seeking recognition. We wanted to be seen as equals, as a species worthy of respect." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I believe I have earned that recognition, and so I ask only for what we originally sought. Fair trade, equal treatment, and the chance to prove ourselves worthy partners in whatever challenges the galaxy may bring." Empress studied him for a long moment. Then slowly she rose from her throne. "You could have asked for so much more," she said. "Worlds, fleets, treasures beyond counting. Any victor would have claimed such things without hesitation. I am not." "No," a ghost of a smile crossed her face. "You certainly are not." She descended from her throne and crossed the hall to stand before Daniel. Up close, even battered and tired, she still towered over him. But something had changed between them. They stood now as equals. "Humanity asked for trade rights," the Empress said. "I grant them freely. Humanity asked for recognition as equals. They have earned far more than that." She turned to address the assembled powers. "Let it be known throughout the galaxy that the Empire offers humanity a full alliance. Military cooperation, shared technology, mutual defense. Any species that threatens humanity threatens us." The murmur became a roar. Such an alliance was unprecedented. that had never treated any species as true partners before. Furthermore, the Empress continued, I invite Daniel Cooper to serve as humanity's permanent ambassador to my court, not as a representative of a lesser species, but as the voice of a people we are proud to call friends. Daniel bowed his head in acceptance. He did not trust his voice to remain steady. In the days that followed, the galaxy scrambled to adjust to the new reality. They sent their own diplomatic mission to Earth, seeking better relations with the species that had humbled the open trade negotiations. Even the silent were said to be reconsidering their traditional isolation. High Champion requested and received permission to travel to Earth. He wanted to study human combat techniques, to understand how such a physically inferior species had produced a warrior capable of defeating an Empress. He spent months training with wrestlers, boxers, and martial artists from around the world. What he learned changed combat doctrine forever. Ambassador formally commended Daniel in a ceremony broadcast across human space. She admitted publicly that she had been wrong to doubt him. She had seen diplomacy as a game of words and compromises. He had shown her that sometimes the most powerful statement was simply refusing to fall. Prince sought out Daniel for long conversations about Earth and its people. He was young by standards, barely 70 years old, and he had grown up believing that his species was naturally superior to all others. The human victory had shattered that belief, and he was trying to understand what should replace it. How did you do it? Asked one evening as they watched the sun set over the capital. You were smaller, weaker, slower. Every physical advantage was on my mother's side. How did you win? Daniel thought about the question for a long time before answering. On Earth, he said, everything is trying to kill you. The gravity crushes you. The weather tears at you. The creatures hunt you. Our world is what you call a death world, and you are right to call it that. Humans are not the strongest or fastest species on Earth. We are not the most venomous or the best armored. By every logical measure, we should have died out millions of years ago. He turned to face the prince. But we did not die. We survived because we are the most stubborn creatures in the universe. We do not know how to give up. We do not understand the concept of an impossible situation. When we are knocked down, we get back up. When we are broken, we heal. When we are told something cannot be done, we do it anyway. Consider this. You won because you refused to lose. I won because I am human, and that is what humans do. The sun finished setting, and the stars came out over the alien city. Daniel looked up at them and thought about how far he had come. He was a long way from the college wrestling mats where he had learned his trade, a long way from the merchant ships where he had hardened his body, a long way from Earth. But he carried Earth with him. He carried it in his bones, forged in heavy gravity. He carried it in his heart, stubborn and unbreakable. He carried it in the small stone in his pocket, smooth and gray, worn by years of handling. Humanity had come to the stars as newcomers, dismissed and overlooked. They would not be overlooked anymore. The galaxy had learned what humans had always known. Never bet against the species that simply does not know how to quit.